Hi, it's Nisa, and I'm continuing the series I'm doing on my YouTube with tips and tricks, just in video format for people who may have similar components to their academic journey as me. And today I'm going to be talking about how to study if you are neurodivergent, maybe ADHD is all I can speak to. But anyone who doesn't learn in the ways that we are necessarily taught in class or in the ways that seem to work for everyone else around them. This video is for you in hopes that it might be helpful, but it may not because everyone's brain is different. Which comes to my first point, which is trial and error. You have to figure out what works for you. Traditionally, medical students, people who study physiology, biomed, or anyone who has to retain a large volume of knowledge will tell you to use Anki. Personally, that never worked for me. There is some really great, robust science behind it. I encourage you to look into the science because it's quite interesting the way they sort of hacked memory to come up with it. For me, though, it did not work. I would say definitely try it, but if it does not work for you, you are not the only one. It is the default way that people study, especially in medical school, and it never worked for me, as well as some of the other things I'm talking about. I mean, it certainly helped in that I was reviewing the material, but it was not the gold standard panacea catch-all that it seemed to be for everyone else. For me, I would say, and this is specifically for ADHD or people who study or who struggle with their focus, the biggest and best thing I ever did was to lean into it. I leaned into my distractibility by multitasking. So I almost always am working on 2 to 3 things at a time. So for example, if I'm doing a protocol at the bench, I will be doing 2 to 3 protocols. Maybe I'm doing PCR and in between the steps at the thermocycler or whatever, I'll be doing cell culture. But that's a bad example because this is really more about studying material, book learning. So if I'm studying something, I will also maybe be reading a paper for a journal club and writing a manuscript. And every time I feel my focus slipping from one, I switch to another and I do it. And I switch to another and do it. Instead of switching to scrolling on my phone or switching to going online doing some random bullshit or switching to just leaving the desk and going off being outside or whatever, this sort of allows you to give your brain what it wants, which is to not be focusing on what you're focusing on in that moment without completely derailing the fact of you being productive overall. This was a game changer for me. It was even better than Pomodoro, which I also encourage you to try if you haven't, which is like the work 25 minutes, break 5 minutes, work 25 minutes, break 5 minutes. If I give myself a break, it's sort of all over for me. But again, you have to figure out what works for you. My biggest thing is lean into the distractibility. And maybe you are someone who struggles with other things like executive dysfunction. I do that too. Lean into it. If I cannot make myself study because I have to clean my house, I just clean my house. Like, it sucks and it doesn't feel good to be that way, but you can't beat yourself up about it. Just clean the house and then study, and accept that as true, and accept that at least you have a clean house and that you're not going to be able to start in the way that you need to start while you have that mental block. So no matter how much you want to beat yourself up over it, just get the mental block out of the way and go about your day. That is something big for me. Another thing for me, I mentioned that Anki did not work for me. So I almost failed this Master's of Physiology course that I was taking. It was during my PhD, but it was a master's course that my PhD mentor actually insisted that I take, and I tried to wiggle out of it, and she did not let me wiggle out of it. It's a physiology for a master's program that is on par with how physiology classes are in medical school. I know this because my friend who took it and then got into Duke for medical school told me that it was actually a little harder. The sheer volume of material, it was insane. And the only way I was able to do it, I went from getting barely a B minus because she felt probably bad for me, on one semester to getting an A and among the highest grades in the cardiology unit, I had to draw. And when I say draw, I mean this is 1 week. Ow. See it? Physiology hurting me even now. Fuck. Jeez. When I say draw, I mean, oh, this looks like kidney. Every single slide I had to draw, write, rewrite, everything. These are with markers. I did this every diagram, every picture. And then later, I'm sure it gets down to the gnarly, like, actual mechanisms. Yep. Every ion, every molecule, every gate, every kinetic diagram, every single one I had to draw. This was the only way I could retain it. And I did this for every unit, for every single thing, every single unit, every single class, and it's the only thing that did it for me. I would guess that for a lot of other people, going this hard is the only way for you to retain the information. And it sucks, it's time consuming, it's a little embarrassing, which we'll get to later, but this saved me. This was the reason I went from almost failing to being like the very top of the class. And you'll notice too how good the handwriting is here. It's because I painstakingly, sisyphenically wrote these in good handwriting, because my handwriting naturally is this. This is my handwriting because I'm used to having to write fast. That's my normal handwriting. This is how I was writing to make sure I retained. There's something about the hand-brain connection that really transcribes, or not transcribes, but really just, it just shoves it into your memory, your long-term memory. And there are studies that show that even if you just scribble on a piece of paper, meaningless scribbles, while you read something, you will retain it better than if your hand is idle and you're not writing anything. This is the only thing that works for me. It may not be the only thing that works for you, but that again reiterates my point. You have to find what does work for you, because it's not going to be the same as what works for everyone else. There was nobody else in my class of 100 people that was doing this, because there was nobody else that needed to. And to be quite honest, that's probably because they were better at retaining information on and recalling it upon only experiencing it once than me. And that's just how it goes, which comes to my very last point. One more thing. A lot of people, this didn't work for me, but I know that it works for a lot of neurodivergent people. Gamifying. There are a lot of apps that let you turn like studying or accomplishing X, Y, and Z into like a game, like a video game, like an RPG, or like even simple like levels. And gamifying works for a lot of neurodivergent people. It tends to trigger this like neural pathway that associates it with fun and games and even risk taking. So didn't work for me, but I wanted to mention it because it does tend to work for a lot of people who have different learning styles than your typical people who excel at book learning. Sorry, I had to plug my laptop back in. The last thing, this is going to be a shorter video because this is the last thing on my list. You have to reframe, or else you're going to burn out and hate yourself. I started as an undergrad, and when I first started this physiology course, I was beating myself up. Look how much harder I have to work than everyone else. I remember a point where I was sitting trying to get through one chapter of the book, and I just started crying because I was reading the same paragraph over and over and I was not retaining it. And I knew that anyone else in my class would have been able to sit down and read it. But I had to reframe all of this. I had to reframe all of it. Even having to do this is a different notebook. I don't know what this is. Oh, it's lungs. This is the surfactant. I had to reframe the fact that I had to do all of this so that I wouldn't get embarrassed and hate myself and descend into self-loathing and think that it made me worse than everyone else. So what I did was overcompensate and tell myself that this made me better than everyone else, and that trying harder than everyone else was my superpower, and that it simply was what it was. I had to try harder than everyone else around me. That was a fact. It was unavoidable. It was not going to change because my brain worked differently than them. And I forced myself to shift my perspective and instead see that as me being better. Not actually better like, I think I'm a better person, but like for my own peace of mind and my own self-esteem and my own self-worth, I had to frame it as a superpower. I had to frame it like, wow, I had to go away from saying, oh my God, you have to do this and nobody else does. You're so stupid. You're so worthless. You don't deserve to be in this PhD program. I had to reframe that to, wow, you were willing to do all of this? You must really want this bad. You must have like so much discipline. You must be so smart to have figured out, whatever you need to tell yourself to compensate for the fact that you may have to work a little harder than everyone else of your peers is worth telling yourself. And that's my biggest tips for studying if you are neurodivergent, and honestly, or if you are just straight up hard on yourself or don't tend to learn well through book learning. Okay, that's it. That's all for now. Bye. It literally cut me. Like years and years after that physiology class, it's still giving me hell.